When Adam sneaked into his own home at 2 a.m., he wasn't prepared for what he'd find. His wife in the shower, and a man casually sitting on their bed. What happens next is a mix of rage, gunshots, and a courtroom that would shock everyone. Slipping into the house without being noticed was a breeze. All Adam had to do was head around back and pop open the basement door. The front door was out of the question. If he tried that, the alarm, which was installed because of his wife, Carla's, insistence, would have gone off. Carla was borderline obsessed with home security, pestering Adam until he finally gave in and set up the system. The same alarm applied to the garage, with a keypad that delayed activation by just 10 seconds. She'd been adamant, saying, 15 seconds is way too long. A thief could already be in the bedroom before the system even kicks in. You just want to give your boyfriend time to sneak out the window, Adam had teased her once. Carla laughed it off and went back to making dinner. But, in all fairness, her reasoning made sense, so Adam adjusted the delay. Of course, this also meant he'd end up triggering the alarm every time he got home, but it was just for a few seconds until he punched in the 4-digit code. So, you check the system every day to make sure it's working, right? Carla had flashed him that bright smile one afternoon as he came inside, grumbling after shutting off the alarm for what felt like the 100th time. The windows were all wired up too, all monitored by the system. But Adam knew no one would notice the wire he'd run along the top of the basement door frame, bypassing the sensor. Carla rarely ventured down there, and even if she did, Adam doubted she'd catch on. He tested the system himself. The panel lit up just fine, and all the cables seemed solid. The door swung open without a peep, the hinges, which he'd carefully oiled, moved smoothly. The same went for the stairs, he'd tightened them up a week earlier. Carla had been bugging him to fix the creaky steps for months. He had tested them with his 190-pound frame, and they didn't make a sound. He grinned to himself, satisfied. He'd tucked his small .22 caliber Beretta into his windbreaker, which he'd hung on the hooks at the top of the stairs. The pistol had a 10-round capacity, and somehow, it was reassuring to feel it there, right where he'd left it. Adam didn't plan to use it unless things got really out of hand, but he also wasn't about to back down. He knew something was off, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. There was no point in confronting Carla head-on. If anything came to light, she'd just deny it, and if nothing did, well, he'd only look like an idiot. What really weighed on him were the years they had spent trying to have kids, with nothing to show for it. He even saw a doctor, only to be laughed at when the old man told him, avoid hugging strange women, even with their clothes on, because you're not just fertile, you're too fertile. The doctor chuckled at his own joke, gave Adam a pat on the back, and sent him home with a grin. Next, it was supposed to be Carla's turn to get checked out, but she opted to see her own doctor, the same one she'd been going to since before they were married. She was insistent about that too. One day, Adam happened to catch sight of her leaving the salon. It was a complete accident, otherwise, he might have never thought anything of it. She was supposed to be at her doctor's appointment, but instead, there she was, getting her hair and nails done. Adam was already running 5 minutes late for work, so the oddness of it didn't fully hit him until he pulled into the garage. That was just a month ago. That evening, Carla had sat him down, looking somber, and told him that while having kids wasn't impossible, it wasn't likely either. She even shed a few quiet tears. He held her until she stopped crying, feeling a knot of nausea in his stomach. "We can just keep trying, babe," she'd said, but something about her tone didn't sit right with him. It wasn't quite convincing, not entirely honest. That's when Adam started paying closer attention. He didn't really believe that the woman from the hair salon, a friend of Carla's, was giving her sound advice on important things. Infidelity? No way. Carla was always at home, like clockwork. There weren't any telltale signs, not a single one. Every time he walked through the door, she was there. Of course, there were the overnight work trips he had to take a couple of times a month. Could it be drugs? Was she possibly hooked on something and hiding it? He doubted it. Carla looked perfectly healthy, if anything, she had put on a little extra weight. Gambling, maybe? Could she be sneaking off to casinos? It seemed unlikely, but Adam checked their finances just in case. Nothing out of the ordinary. Carla was careful with money, and apart from her wardrobe and salon visits, there wasn't anything suspicious. But he couldn't help but notice that her nails had looked pretty perfect that day. It never made sense to him. He had heard, "I broke my nail," at least 50 times over the years. Later that night, while Carla was in the shower, Adam went through her dresser and peeked inside her closet. Carla had always had a thing for nice clothes. He saw outfits in there that he swore he'd never laid eyes on before. In one of the dresser drawers, he found a small bag filled with lacy panties. He couldn't figure out why she bothered with them, he'd never seen those either. Still, it wasn't completely out of the ordinary. When they'd go out to dinner or for a night of dancing, she'd often slip into fancy outfits and tiny underwear that seemed to come out of nowhere. Adam loved it when she'd step into the room, twirling around to show off, clearly relishing his admiration. Carla definitely had the ability to turn heads, and she knew it all too well. He chuckled, almost wishing it wasn't a Saturday night, feeling proud of how she carried herself. He could hardly wait to peel off the layers of clothes later and see what surprise awaited him underneath. And that's when he found the birth control pills. Birth control. He turned red and had to calm himself down before Carla finished her shower. His gut reaction was to snap and demand answers, but he had learned his lesson about jumping to conclusions. Years ago, he had been dating a girl named Katie. Things were serious, he was about to propose, and she knew it too. They'd even met each other's parents. Then, at a party, he caught her kissing some guy, pressing herself against him in a way that was definitely more than friendly. Adam froze, his mind reeling as he watched her practically melt into the guy. Furious, he stormed over and knocked the guy flat on his back. Turns out, the guy was her brother, fresh home from college. Katie had planned to surprise Adam that evening by introducing him. She had mentioned having a brother, but she hadn't said he'd be there that night. After Adam threw him out, Katie refused to return his calls. She had been dropping hints for weeks that she was ready to take things to the next level. In fact, earlier that evening, she had slipped a pack of condoms into his pocket with a sly smile. But after the scene with her brother, everything was ruined. It was one of those moments that taught Adam a hard lesson: think before you act. Adam had to put in a bit more effort. His job involved coordinating fence installations for farmers, designing enclosures and pens so they could manage their livestock, whether it was getting cattle ready for auctions, separating them for treatment, or general organization. It was a great gig, honestly. Not only did it let him meet some fantastic folks, but he also got to work outdoors. His most recent project was a winner. He managed to sell nearly 5 miles of fencing, and the family he worked with even invited him to dinner. The meal was as good as it gets: ham and black bean cornbread, the real deal, none of that boxed stuff. Paul Johnson, the head of the family, was a grizzled old guy, tall and lean. He always wore these faded blue long johns, visible under his thick, unbuttoned work shirt, with suspenders holding up his heavy work pants. His wife, Carol, was a cheerful, round woman with a smile that seemed permanently fixed on her face. After spending the entire day touring the ranch on Yamaha ATVs, Adam and Paul had become fast friends. Both shared a love for hunting and fishing, and in a strange way, Paul became the father figure Adam never really had. It's funny how that can happen so quickly, but spending a day talking about life with another man can do that. The couple had a daughter too, around 25, and she was quite attractive. Even in her flannel shirt and jeans, it was easy to tell she was a beautiful young woman. She seemed a bit interested in Adam, but of course, he was married, so nothing was going to happen there. Her name was Ashley. The next day, Adam found himself thinking about her the entire way home. Good people, he thought, the kind of folks you'd want to know better. Their ranch was set on rolling hills with plenty of water, and Paul had been raising his herds for years. Now he needed solid fences and a few large sheds. The outside world was creeping closer to his land, new neighbors moving in, annoyed by cattle and sheep wandering into their yards and flower beds. So, Paul had no choice, either put up fences or let the land get taken over by houses. He chose fences. For Adam, it was one of the biggest sales he'd ever made. The only downside to Adam's job was that a lot of these big ranches were located far from home, and often he'd find himself 300 miles away. This time, it was more than 400 miles out into Wyoming. His company covered the cost of motels and meals while he was on the road, so instead of driving back home right away, Adam usually stayed the night and headed out the next day. But this time was different. Paul and Carol insisted he stay with them, showing him to a large bedroom upstairs. The place was so quiet, Adam had trouble falling asleep. Every now and then, he'd hear a cow or sheep, and each time it startled him awake like an alarm. The night was warm, so he kicked off the blanket. Around 2 a.m., he got up to use the bathroom, and on his way down the hall, he passed another bedroom. The door was cracked open, with a soft nightlight glowing inside. There, lying on top of the blankets, was Ashley. She was completely naked, her lower half hidden in shadow, but one bare breast was visible in the dim light. She appeared to be asleep, but the sight was undeniably seductive. Adam felt the heat rise in his face. He knew she was a stunning woman, but he quickly averted his eyes. It wasn't right to be looking at her like that. On his way back to his room, he noticed the door was now closed, and embarrassment washed over him. He must have been caught peeking. The following morning, Paul and Carol sat Adam down at the kitchen table. In front of him were generous piles of eggs, ham, and potatoes, honestly, the best he'd ever tasted. "We grow them ourselves. Got about 20 acres up on the northern ridge just for potatoes," Paul said, noticing the satisfied look on Adam's face as he reached for a second helping. Right then, Ashley walked in, glancing around as she let out a yawn. She was dressed in her usual flannel shirt and jeans, and Adam had to admit, she looked great. She shot him a sly, almost mischievous look, raising an eyebrow in a way that made him flush with embarrassment. Carol noticed it too, glancing between them before giving a knowing grin. "More coffee, Adam?" she asked. Adam nodded, appreciating their hospitality. After breakfast, he gathered his things, packed up the contract and the nice check into his briefcase. It was time to head back to his own life. As he walked out to his truck, it crossed his mind that he could see himself living like these folks and being perfectly content. Before he left, Carol handed him a loaf of her cornbread as a parting gift. He thanked her and tucked it into the truck, already looking forward to enjoying it during the long drive home. Ashley stood on the porch, casually leaning against the railing, watching as he prepared to leave. Adam waved, and she waved back. All the way home, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He tried to distract himself, but the image of her lying there, bare in the soft light, kept flashing in his mind. Carla, on the other hand, always kept the house spotless and was eager to greet him with hugs and affection whenever he returned from a trip. His overnight trips rarely lasted more than a single night. Adam loved coming home after those long drives, but he couldn't help but notice that after these overnight stays, Carla seemed extra affectionate, almost clingy. At 34, she was still in great shape. Her short blonde hair was always styled just right, and she certainly didn't lack in the looks department, especially up top. Carla worked as a real estate agent on commission. While there were months where she earned more than him, those were rare, and lately, she'd been going a month or two without closing any sales at all. Still, they made things work. Adam knew he needed a new truck. His old Ford F-150 was still kicking but was definitely showing its age. He figured it could wait since it was fully paid off. Their relationship was solid. They shared moments of intimacy a couple of times a week, and Carla always seemed genuinely pleased. Overall, he felt like their life together was pretty good. Sure, there were things he wouldn't mind tweaking, but he made the best of it. This last trip ended much the same way. Carla was waiting for him, all ready for some cuddling. Within minutes, they were in the bedroom. As usual, the sheets were fresh and crisp, like she always made sure they were when he came home. Adam went along with it, but that nagging suspicion lingered in the back of his mind. When he was deep in work, occupied with numbers and plans, he didn't dwell on it much. It didn't weigh heavily on him, not yet. There wasn't anything concrete to back up his worries. Maybe Carla really had squeezed in both a doctor's appointment and a visit to the salon that day. Maybe those new clothes and lacy underwear were part of a surprise for him. She'd done that before. More than once, she'd step out in some fancy new outfit or show him a tiny thong with a playful grin, spinning around like she was walking a runway before a nice dinner. But still, something felt off. That suspicion refused to go away. He needed to find out what was really going on. The birth control pills had shaken him. It wasn't just the fact that she didn't want a kid, it was the lie that bothered him the most. So Adam made a few adjustments to keep an eye on things, to uncover the truth. He did it right under Carla's nose, and she didn't even notice. The night everything blew up, Adam drove past his house, scanning for any unfamiliar cars. He didn't see anything, but he hadn't really expected to since the neighbors were close by. The light was on in the upstairs bedroom, and the curtains were drawn tight. All he had was a heavy heart and that pack of birth control pills he found hidden in her underwear drawer. Finding out she'd gone to the salon instead of the doctor had been a jolt to his system, and that was where everything had started unraveling. His mom always used to say, "If you smell a rat, it's nearby," and she must have told him that 100 times. Well, Adam could definitely smell one now. At the top of the stairs, he stopped to listen. The only sound was the shower running. It struck him as odd because it was almost 2 a.m. By now, he figured she'd either be asleep or that he'd catch her in the middle of something. If she was up to anything, this would be the time. She thought he was still in Wyoming for work, and there was no way she expected him home until late the next day. In truth, there had been a legitimate job out in Wyoming. He'd even wrapped up a phone sale with Paul and Carol, who were thrilled with the previous work he'd done. They had invited him to stay, but Adam had been preoccupied with securing another smaller contract nearby. For a moment, his mind drifted to the idea of sticking around Wyoming, maybe grabbing some more of that cornbread, and perhaps even bumping into Ashley again. He shook his head, trying to clear the thought. It was ridiculous. He was standing on the top step of his own house, with a gun in hand, and all he could think about was work and a woman he barely knew. He was on the verge of just backing out, slipping away unnoticed. But he had to know. If Carla wasn't doing anything wrong, he could quietly leave and never think about it again. But what if she was? Adam had no idea what he'd do if he found someone in there with her. The thought of her cheating on him had been gnawing at him, though there was no concrete proof. Just that sinking feeling. He stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, feeling like a fool. He listened again. Still, the only sound was the shower. Carla could easily spend half an hour in there, so that wasn't unusual. Finally, he nudged the door open a little, not expecting to find much. That's when he saw him, a man, sitting on the edge of their rumpled bed, his back to the door. He was fully dressed, casually flipping through a magazine. Adam blinked in disbelief. It was his Popular Mechanics magazine. Anger surged through him. The shower was still running, and the guy casually turned another page. "Who the hell are you?" Adam asked, stepping into the room. The man nearly jumped out of his skin, whipping around to face Adam with wide eyes. It was Mark Lawson, the manager at the local bank where Carla's real estate office handled closings. Mark was in his early 50s, with graying hair at the temples and a solid, broad frame. He was a bigger guy than Adam. Adam knew that if there was any serious money changing hands in town, Mark was usually involved somehow. He also knew that while he was fast and tough, tangling with Mark might leave him with more than a few bruises. "Hey, this isn't what it looks like," Mark shouted, his eyes growing wide when he saw the gun in Adam's hand. "You came into my house to take advantage of my wife in my own bed?" Adam growled, fury in his voice. "Buddy, listen, it's not." Mark didn't get to finish. Adam lifted the gun, pointing it right at him. Mark tossed the magazine aside and lunged forward in a desperate attempt to attack. This completely caught Adam off guard. He thought for sure Mark would back down and make a run for it. If Mark hadn't been on the opposite side of the bed, he probably would have reached Adam before he could react. But the delay was enough. Adam fired twice. Mark dropped to the floor, groaning loudly. It all felt surreal. From the bathroom, Adam heard Carla scream, and the door flew open. She stood there, soaking wet and completely naked. "Who the hell is this guy? And what's he doing in my house?" Adam shouted, his voice shaking with anger. Carla's hand flew to her mouth as she stared at Mark, who was writhing on the floor in pain. "Honey, it's not what you think," she stammered, her eyes wide. "Jesus, were you scrubbing yourself clean for this piece of crap?" Adam yelled. "No, baby, we were just going to talk, I swear," she cried. "Talk? At 2 a.m? In our bedroom? And you're naked? You just needed a quick shower." His words dripped with disbelief and rage. Her eyes filled with panic. "We didn't. You're lying," Adam shouted, his anger boiling over. In a blind fit of rage, Adam fired at her too. Carla fell to the ground, screaming, just like one of those over-the-top scenes from a TV show. For a moment, Adam just stood there, watching her. It didn't feel real, like he was outside his own body, watching a scene from a movie. Then, he turned and looked at Mark. The man was still groaning, his eyes filled with terror as he glanced up at Adam. "Please don't kill me, man, no, please," Mark begged, his voice full of desperation. For a second, Adam considered putting a bullet right between his eyes but decided against it. Instead, he delivered a sharp blow to Mark's head, knocking him out cold. "Bastard," Adam muttered as he stood over him. Suddenly, an eerie calm washed over Adam, like none of this was really happening to him. He walked over to Carla, who was still sobbing and crying on the floor. "Was it worth it?" he asked, his voice strangely steady. Carla didn't respond. She just stared up at him, wide-eyed and terrified. "To hell with it," Adam muttered. He went to the nightstand, picked up the phone, and dialed. "I found an intruder in my wife's bedroom and shot him. My wife got hurt in the process. Send an ambulance, please." His voice was chillingly calm, like a snake coiling around its prey. After that, he tucked the gun into his belt and headed downstairs. He checked the fridge and found a 6-pack of beer, typical Carla, always keeping the house stocked. On the counter, there was an unopened bag of chips and a jar of mixed nuts, his favorites. Adam grabbed them and went into the living room, settling down where he could keep an eye on the staircase. He tried to distract himself by thinking about the job he had just closed and began running the numbers in his head. The gun poked at his side, so he shifted it for comfort. He could still hear Carla's cries from upstairs, so he reached for the remote and turned on the TV. Some people were chatting on the screen, but he didn't really follow what they were saying. The chips were fresh, though, and halfway through his second beer, he finally heard the sirens in the distance. Not exactly in a rush, he thought, surprising even himself with the calmness of it all. On the way to the station, Adam was irritated that they hadn't let him bring the jar of nuts along. The cops weren't exactly gentle either. They'd found him sitting there, eating chips with a gun tucked into his waistband, and all hell broke loose. Guns were drawn, people were shouting, and one officer yanked the gun from his belt. Adam had just been reaching for another chip when they slammed him to the ground and twisted his arms behind his back. Ow, you're hurting me. Adam complained, but no one bothered to respond. Shut up, one of the officers barked at him. Later, when he asked about his can of nuts, the reply was another sharp, shut up. It's not looking great, the lawyer Adam hired told him the next day. Adam had never met the guy before, he had never needed a lawyer until now. He'd heard the lawyer's name from one of the guys in holding. Mercer, McLaren, Hansen, Ireland, and Phillips, the guy had rattled off, as if he spent a lot of time dealing with lawyers. I go with Tom Ireland. Damn good lawyer, the guy had bragged. So why are you still in here? Adam had asked, which earned him nothing but a sideways glare. But he needed legal help, so he went with Tom Ireland. Tom Ireland was a short, stocky guy with a beat-up briefcase that had seen better days. He glanced over the charges and shook his head. So, what's next? Adam asked. Bail hearing. You've got enough equity in your home to cover it. After that, we'll wait for the grand jury to review the case. How bad is it? Adam asked, feeling a knot in his stomach. Attempted murder. If you're gonna shoot someone, make sure you kill them. If you leave them alive, they'll end up testifying against you, Ireland said bluntly. You're in deep here. I still can't believe you used that little pop gun. You should have gotten yourself a Magnum or something, he added with a slight smirk. How are they? Adam asked, referring to Carla and Mark. No one had told him much of anything. Your wife's gonna be fine, she's got a hole in her side, but nothing life-threatening. Johnson, though, he's in rough shape. Those little .22 bullets tend to bounce around inside. He went through a long surgery. Now, tell me, why'd you shoot him again? He was still coming at me, Adam said, defensively. Well, that second shot looks pretty deliberate. You hit him below the belt, Ireland said, glancing sideways at Adam. Great, Adam muttered, his voice flat. Ireland chuckled. A Magnum would have blown them clean off, but you just put a hole between them, the lawyer joked grimly. Nearly a month went by before bail was finally set, and Adam was released. Stepping outside, the fresh air hit him, almost catching him off guard after being cooped up for so long. But he couldn't go home. The court order prohibited him from coming within 100 meters of Carla, and a restraining order made it clear he had to keep his distance. Not that Adam cared. Carla had been out of the hospital for weeks by then, but he had managed to beat her to filing the divorce papers. Since they had bought the house together, either one of them could have signed first. It was a small victory, but it felt good knowing he had done it before she even realized. She'd probably been too busy recovering to notice. Tom Ireland was good at his job, but he wasn't cheap. Adam's savings had already taken a hit just to retain him, and Adam knew the fees would only pile up from here. He also knew Carla would be pissed, but it didn't matter to him anymore. His truck was still parked where he had left it, down the street, around the corner. He figured it was far enough from the house to stay within the 100-meter requirement, but he wasn't entirely sure. The truck had racked up a dozen parking tickets, and Adam was surprised it hadn't been towed. He peeled off the tickets and tossed them in the trash. What are they gonna do, arrest me again? Adam muttered under his breath. At the office, Adam went in to speak with his boss. The guy looked nervous, fidgeting in his chair, and finally admitted that they had hired someone else to replace him while he was gone. Adam wasn't surprised, he'd already seen the headlines in the local papers. That night, Adam curled up in the front seat of his truck, parked at a spot called Green Park. It felt like life was playing some kind of cruel joke on him. The next day, he called his lawyer, and somehow, Tom Ireland managed to arrange for a police escort so Adam could pick up some of his things from the house. Maybe Ireland wasn't such a bad lawyer after all. When Adam arrived, there was no sign of Carla. He gathered his clothes, his tools, and both of his collectible Fender guitars. He also grabbed his fishing gear and his coin collections. He thought about taking the big screen TV but decided against it. There wasn't exactly a power outlet in the park. As he was heading out, he spotted the jar of mixed nuts still sitting on the counter. Grinning, he grabbed it. He opened the fridge, briefly considered taking the last 5 beers, but when the cop gave him a look, he left them behind. On his way out, Adam changed the alarm code right in front of the officer, who didn't even notice. It was a petty move, but it made Adam chuckle. A local shop gave him $400 for the 2 guitars and most of his fishing rods, though he kept one for himself. That left him with $200 in cash, everything he had left in the world. He headed to the post office where he and Carla had rented a mailbox. Of course, his key didn't work anymore. She had changed it, cutting him off completely. Still, the clerk handed over a stack of mail without any trouble, despite the sign saying they weren't supposed to do that. There were a few credit card offers, some forms, and oddly enough, one from a funeral home. Somehow, that felt fitting. Adam rented a new P.O. box and filled out the paperwork to update his address with the court. He'd considered just hitting the road, but with his bright red Ram 1500, he figured he'd be too easy to find. 2 weeks later, Adam still couldn't land a job. His unsmiling mug had been plastered across the news for days. The papers ran stories about an overly jealous, unstable husband who barged into a business meeting and opened fire. He figured Matt Johnson, the well-connected local banker, had spun that version of events. Adam couldn't stop thinking about what his lawyer had said: if you're gonna shoot someone, make sure you kill them. Otherwise, you'll end up dealing with exactly this kind of mess. Back in Green Park, his makeshift home, Adam drove his truck further into the bushes, away from the road. He pulled out his fishing rod, caught a few grasshoppers, and managed to reel in 6 small trout from a nearby stream. They were tiny, maybe 12 centimeters long, but he didn't care. What were they gonna do, find him? He built a small fire and cooked the fish. He was cleaning the frying pan in the stream when his phone rang. "Adam, hey man, I need to talk to you," his old boss said, his tone suddenly sweet and friendly. What the hell, Adam thought. "Remember that job you landed fencing Paul Edwards' farm out in Wyoming?" his boss continued. "Of course," Adam replied. "Well, he's got over 5,000 acres, and now he wants to fence in an even larger area, plus build 2 barns and run a fence right up to the city limits. It's going to be the biggest job we've ever had," his boss said, sounding excited. "So what's that got to do with me?" Adam asked, still simmering with anger over how he'd been treated. Lately, it felt like everyone had turned their back on him, and he'd spent most of his time alone in the park. "Edwards insists on you. Says if it's not you, he'll take his business elsewhere." "Well, that's nice of him, but," Adam hesitated, knowing he wasn't supposed to leave the state. "So, what do you say?" His boss's voice sounded almost pleading. Adam wasn't sure how to respond. Then a thought crossed his mind: maybe there was a way around this. "What do you suggest? Are you offering my job back?" "Well, no, but how about double commissions?" "Double?" Adam asked, surprised. "Yeah, and full-time work again. What do you think?" Adam paused, hearing the desperation in his boss's voice. "You don't have a weapon, do you?" his boss added. "No, I'm not allowed to have one." "The cops took mine," Adam said, though the question sparked irritation. He wasn't some crazed shooter gunning down everyone in sight, he'd only shot 2 people. But the papers had turned him into a monster. "What about my salary? It wasn't right when I got fired. I didn't even get to explain myself." "Double commissions for a few months, then back to half, plus your benefits," his boss stammered, clearly eager to seal the deal. Adam knew he was their top salesman, and his boss's hesitation confirmed it. He could almost hear the man calculating his next move. "All right, deal," Adam finally agreed. Later, he stopped by the corner store and treated himself to a jar of mixed nuts to celebrate. He also grabbed a bottle of beer, even though the court had prohibited alcohol. He drank it quickly and buried the empty bottle in the bushes. The following day, Adam was back in court, standing before the sour-faced old judge who eyed him and his lawyer with suspicion. "You're facing some very serious charges, Mr. Taylor. Very serious. But I can't prevent a man from earning a living while the case is pending. Don't mess this up, or you'll find yourself right back in jail. Got it?" "Yes, Your Honor," Adam replied, keeping a straight face. The next morning, Adam was on his way to Wyoming. Paul Edwards greeted him warmly, all smiles and a firm handshake, clearly unaware of the headlines that had been splashed across the news. Adam didn't see the point in bringing it up. "We plant corn down by the creek," Paul explained, gesturing to the wide-open fields. "Good soil on the south side, but we need to keep the sheep away." "The Angus?" "We used to let them free range, but with all the construction going on, the neighbors won't stop complaining. So, we're fencing them in." Adam couldn't help but think that Paul must have a lot of money. By the time they made it back to the ranch house, it was nearly 7 p.m. Adam knew he had to leave if he wanted to make it back to Oregon before midnight, as the court required. He hated the idea of skipping dinner, and missing the chance to see Olivia, but he didn't have much choice. The weight of it all lingered as he left the ranch. The next morning, back in Oregon, Adam called to check in with the bail office. "You don't need to call every damn day. Just follow the rules, all right," the person on the other end snapped. "Okay," Adam said, realizing they probably weren't keeping close tabs on him unless something big happened. He hung up, got back in his truck, and headed straight for the Edwards farm, pushing the speed limit the entire way. When he arrived, Olivia was sitting on the porch. She jumped up, disappeared inside for a moment, then came back out wearing a big sun hat and carrying a basket. She had on cut-off jean shorts and a t-shirt, and it was pretty clear she wasn't wearing a bra as her breasts bounced lightly when she moved. "Let's go," she said, hopping into the truck. "Dad told me to show you the area near the build site so you can take some measurements. Everyone else is busy getting their hair cut." "A haircut?" Adam asked, confused. "Sheep," Olivia clarified with a grin. "Everyone's busy shearing until dark." It took them over an hour to reach the area she was talking about. Cattle wandered aimlessly around them as they drove, barely acknowledging the truck. Along the way, they talked about all sorts of things. Adam couldn't help but steal glances at Olivia, noticing how her soft breasts bounced with every bump in the road. The thought crossed his mind that it had been a long time since he'd been with a woman, but he quickly shoved that thought aside. He was here for work, and the last thing he wanted was to upset her parents. They eventually came to a large rise in the trail that overlooked a pretty sizable river. Off in the distance, about half a mile away, Adam saw a row of 3-story apartment buildings that looked out of place in the rugged landscape. Beyond that, he spotted a highway, cars rushing by. Progress, Adam thought grimly. It dawned on him that this was the root of the problem. Grazing laws didn't mean much anymore, livestock wandering into people's backyards was now just a nuisance. The new fence would have to be set 15 meters from the buildings, running right up to the city limits. They were fortunate to own both sides of the riverbank. To cross the creek, Adam switched the truck into 4-wheel drive, driving along the proposed fence line and using the speedometer to estimate distances. By the time they returned to the ranch house, Adam calculated that the job would take his entire team several weeks to complete. When he finished, he glanced over at Olivia, who was sitting cross-legged in a chair, her legs swinging lazily as she dangled a shoe from her toes. "Everyone's down in the lower barn now. They won't be back for a few hours." "Want to go upstairs?" she asked with a mischievous grin. Adam flushed at her boldness but shook his head. "I can't. I mean, I'm still married. We live separately, but I don't really know you." "Oh," Olivia said, her smile fading. "I didn't realize. You're not wearing a ring. Are you getting divorced?" Yeah, most likely. In fact, I'm sure of it. So, you didn't get along? She asked. Adam hesitated before deciding to be honest. I shot her. You what? Olivia's eyes went wide with shock. I shot her and her lover. They were in my house, in my bed. That's why I had to leave so quickly that night. Well, I can't say I blame you, Olivia said thoughtfully. Did you kill them? No. Well then, you've got a lot of problems, huh? She said with a touch of sympathy. Adam nodded, then told her the whole story. Olivia sat quietly, listening to every word. So that's why you've had to go back to Oregon every night, she asked after a pause. Yeah, until the trial. After that, I might end up in prison. Maybe not, she said, sounding optimistic. We'll see. Can I come with you? With me? Adam asked, surprised. To Oregon? Yeah. I'm not scared of you. You're a good guy. Maybe the only good one I've met. I'm not sure yet, but I'm tired of being stuck out here in the middle of nowhere. Don't get me wrong, I love it here, it's my home. But all the men around here are either old or married, and I get lonely sometimes. Adam was momentarily speechless. What about your parents? Wouldn't they be upset if you just left? Olivia shrugged. Dad told me I should try to lasso you, she said with a playful smile. He thinks you're a good investment. Adam chuckled nervously. He hadn't expected her to be so straightforward. Adam, I'm not some naive girl. I've been with a man before, well, a boy, really. We grew up together, tried it out, but it didn't work. I'm still young, and I think I'd like to be with you. If we decide to be together, I can promise you this, I'll never cheat on you. You can trust me on that. I've already seen what happens when you get mad. She giggled softly. Adam didn't have to think long. What are we going to tell your parents? He asked. Tell them what? There's nothing to tell, Olivia said with a grin. She stood up, grabbed his hand, and started leading him toward the lower barn, where a dozen men were working with the sheep. Paul Edwards saw them coming, noticed their hands clasped together, and smiled knowingly. Adam and I are heading out. We'll be back tomorrow morning, Olivia announced confidently. All right, sweetie. Have fun, Paul replied, flashing them a grin before turning back to work. Adam blinked in surprise, but Olivia just laughed. Mom and Dad are farmers. They get how life works. Everyone's involved in it, one way or another. It's natural, she said, amused. Adam wasn't sure how to respond. He'd never met a woman like her before, so straightforward and unashamed of what she wanted. And she clearly wanted to be with him. On the drive to the motel, Adam did his best to stick to the speed limit. Well, most of the time, anyway. It wasn't easy, especially with Olivia sitting beside him, suddenly bare-chested. They had barely hit the open highway when she yanked off her t-shirt, leaving nothing to the imagination. Adam's initial thoughts were confirmed, she was stunning. He even slowed down for a second, but Olivia quickly stopped him. Not yet. The first time should be in a bed. By the time we get there, you'll be more than ready, she teased, reaching over and trailing her hand along his leg. At one point, Adam had to ask her to put her shirt back on. Trying to keep his truck on the road wasn't easy when his hands were itching to reach for her instead. One trucker almost ran off the road after catching sight of her. He can see you, Adam warned, trying to focus on driving. I know, Olivia giggled, licking her lips playfully. I might just make his day, she said, straightening up and giving the driver an eyeful. Good Lord, Adam muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. It took several miles, but Adam finally convinced her to cover up before they caused an accident. 5 miles later, they pulled into the motel parking lot. Olivia slipped her t-shirt back on to go inside, but the second the door closed behind them, off it came again. Adam was used to making love to Carla, who had always been eager, if a bit impatient. But Olivia was something else, wild, playful, and full of energy. Before Adam had even gotten his pants off, she was on top of him, taking control. Her body was slender and firm, her youthful curves making the moment all the more intense. They spent most of the night exploring each other, lost in the moment. "What did he say?" Adam asked late the next morning, around 11 a.m., as Olivia called her father to explain that they were taking the day off and wouldn't be back at the ranch until later. "He just laughed," she said, climbing back into bed with him. By the end of that day, Adam knew he was falling for Olivia. He barely knew her, but it didn't matter. He wanted her. Over dinner at a small cafe in town, he finally told her how he felt. "Do you mean just us? No one else?" Olivia asked, her tone playful but intrigued. "Yeah. I want you to be mine, just mine," Adam said, serious. "Wow, I kind of expected you just wanted to have a little fun. Dad said he thinks you'd make a good breeder." "That's how he sees things," Olivia chuckled. Adam blinked, taken aback by the comment, but Olivia just laughed it off. "You're wonderful, Adam. But where are we going to live?" she asked, smiling. "I'm not sure yet," Adam admitted. "Well, you've got a job and a truck. We can start with that and figure the rest out," Olivia said, still smiling. "If I choose to be with you, it'll be forever. No games." "Olivia, I'm falling in love with you," Adam said, his voice full of sincerity. "Don't do this." "Not yet," Olivia said, her face turning serious. "I like being with you, but I'm still figuring things out." "Relax, Adam. For now, you're the only one who'll touch me. But if I decide this isn't what I want, you'll never touch me again. Got it?" "All right," Adam replied, sensing her firmness. "We understand each other." "Good," she said, her grin returning. "Now, let's head back to the motel." The next day, Adam finished up the proposals and contracts, then sat down with Paul and Linda to finalize everything. After a few minor tweaks, Paul signed the papers and shook Adam's hand. Just as they were wrapping up, Olivia appeared with 2 suitcases in tow. Paul and Linda exchanged surprised looks before turning to Adam. "I'm going with Adam," Olivia declared confidently. For the first time, Adam saw Linda's smile falter, though she quickly composed herself. Paul walked over, hugging his daughter tightly, then turned to Adam, his expression serious. "You've got a lot to sort out," Paul said, his eyes locking onto Adam's. "Before you can think about starting a life with Olivia." Adam nodded. He understood. Paul was right, his life was a mess, and Olivia wasn't going anywhere until he figured it out. Olivia's shoulders sagged a little, but she didn't argue. That evening, Adam hugged Olivia tightly before saying goodbye. "I'll come back as soon as I can," he promised her. "It's okay, Adam. I'll wait for you." "I still need to be sure," she whispered, her eyes misting with tears as he climbed into his truck. The drive back felt endless. Adam didn't want to return to the life he'd left behind. The only place he wanted to be was with Olivia. The legal process moved slowly, and there were times when Adam almost forgot about the looming trial. Work kept him busy, but it couldn't fully distract him from the uncertainty that hung over his head. On weekends, he made long drives back to Wyoming to be with Olivia. Paul and Linda welcomed him each time, and as the weeks passed, Adam started feeling like part of their family. Even his appetite returned, thanks to Linda's home-cooked meals. After a while, Adam began to feel like he belonged there. He put on a little weight, something inevitable with the mountains of food Linda made. Olivia proved to be just as good in the kitchen and was a hard worker around the ranch. One day, Adam watched as a spooked calf bolted, dragging him across the field. Olivia couldn't stop laughing at the sight but eventually helped him round up the calf. Together, they patched up the animal's cut and returned it to its mother. Life on the ranch felt natural, peaceful, like Adam had always been meant to be there. But the calm would always break when he returned to his small apartment in the city. His heart was in Wyoming with Olivia, but his life was still tangled up in legal troubles he couldn't ignore. Then, one day, the phone rang. Adam was startled to hear Carla's voice on the other end. "How are you, Adam?" she asked, her tone surprisingly soft. Adam figured she wanted to discuss the divorce. There wasn't much to say, she'd already been forced out of the house, and it was now up for sale. "I'm fine." "What do you want?" he replied, keeping his tone flat. "I just wanted to thank you for not fighting me over the support payments," she said. Adam let out a bitter chuckle. The court had ordered him to pay her a significant amount, and his lawyer had warned that once he got back to work, those payments would increase. Carla had played her role well, painting herself as the victim who couldn't work while she recovered from her injury. "I also wanted to let you know. I forgive you," Carla added softly. "What?" Adam asked, disbelief washing over him. "I forgive you, Adam. I know you were angry and didn't mean to hurt me." "You've got to be kidding me," Adam replied, feeling his anger start to bubble up. "No, I'm serious. I still love you. I always have," she said, her tone becoming gentler. "I was thinking, maybe, if you wanted, we could go out, grab some dinner, and just talk." Adam recognized that tone, it was one he'd heard too many times before, and it infuriated him. "That's not a good idea," Adam finally said after a long, tense pause. "Of course, it is. We can get things back to how they used to be. A nice night out, and afterward, we could have some fun, like old times. I'll even wear one of those outfits you love. Maybe skip the underwear this time. You'd like that, wouldn't you?" Her voice took on a seductive edge, clearly aimed at provoking him. It worked. "Carla, you cheated on me. There's no way in hell I'm going on a date with you." Adam's voice shook with fury. "Oh, don't be so harsh. I'm trying to make peace here," she cooed. "I told you, I forgive you. I know you didn't really mean to shoot me." "Didn't mean to shoot you?" Adam barked, incredulous. "It would have been better if I had killed you and that scumbag Johnson. Do you forgive me for thinking that too?" Carla's tone instantly shifted, turning icy and venomous. "Matt knows how to reach places in me you never could," she spat. Silence followed, and Adam's blood boiled. "I should come over there and finish what I started," he roared into the phone. A quiet murmur echoed in the background before the line abruptly clicked and went dead. Adam sat there, fists clenched, his knuckles white from gripping the phone. He couldn't believe what had just happened. That woman had the nerve to call, offer forgiveness, and then mock him like that. He felt like an idiot for even staying on the line as long as he did. His anger was still simmering when, later that day, 3 large police officers stormed into his apartment, cuffing him on the spot. It was reckless. How could he have let it happen? Why did he threaten her? His lawyer, Tom Ireland, was just as frustrated when they met. "Why in the world did you threaten her?" Ireland asked, barely sitting down before diving into the conversation. "I didn't threaten her, not really. She just made me so damn mad." Adam shot back defensively. "She called me, saying she forgave me. This woman cheated on me. She's crazy." Adam tried to explain, the frustration clear in his voice. "Well, they've got a tape of you threatening her and Johnson." "That's a violation of your restraining order," Ireland said grimly. "She called me." Adam exclaimed, bewildered by the absurdity of it all. "Well, according to them, that's not how it went down," Ireland sighed, pulling out a recorder and pressing play. The tape began with Carla's soft, apologetic voice. She sounded like she was trying to reconcile, positioning herself as the victim. Adam's own voice, by contrast, came through as harsh, angry, and filled with threats. It was bad, really bad. They edited the damn recording. Adam protested, feeling dread settle in the pit of his stomach. Maybe. But it doesn't matter. This doesn't look good at all, Ireland said, shaking his head. The judge wasn't impressed either. A few days later, Adam stood in court, facing that same sour-faced judge. The tape was played for everyone to hear, and while Carla's voice seemed soft, even remorseful, Adam's furious outbursts painted him as a man filled with rage and vengeance. This man is too dangerous to be allowed his freedom, the prosecutor declared with conviction. Adam's lawyer did everything he could to show it was all a setup, that Carla and Matt Johnson had conspired to frame him. But in the end, the only thing that mattered was the recording. Back in his cell, days blurred into weeks, and weeks into months. Adam had slowly come to terms with the likelihood that he'd end up in prison. His lawyer stopped by occasionally with updates, but none of it sounded good. Then, one day, a new face appeared, a young woman named Rachel Martin. "I don't think I can afford another lawyer," Adam said flatly, cutting her off before she even started. Rachel gave him a warm smile. "Don't worry, you're not paying me. I'm taking this case pro bono." Adam looked at her, confused. "Why?" Her smile widened. "You've got friends in high places. I'm working with a team that believes you've been wronged. We're going to help you. And Paul Edwards and his wife send their regards," she added with a playful glint in her eye. "They also wanted me to remind you about something, good breeding stock, I believe it was." Adam chuckled. "Paul said that, huh?" Rachel nodded. "They've been putting pressure on the right people. Things are about to move a lot quicker." And she wasn't wrong. Things began happening fast after that. Matt Johnson, who had so much pull in their small town, couldn't stop what was coming from outside. Adam's new legal team uncovered evidence that the tape had been doctored. They traced the call back to Johnson's office phone. 3 days later, Adam was out on bail again. The first thing Adam did after his release was pick up his truck and drive straight to Wyoming. When he arrived, Olivia practically knocked him over with a hug. Paul and Linda stood on the porch, smiling as if everything had finally fallen into place. "Thank you," Adam said later that evening. "But why did you do this for me?" "We didn't do it for you," Paul said with a grin. "We did it for Olivia." That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, Adam sat down with Paul, Linda, and Olivia and told them everything that had happened. He'd shared bits and pieces with Olivia before, but this time he laid it all out. They listened without judgment, and for the first time in months, Adam felt a sense of peace. A weight he hadn't realized he was carrying lifted off his shoulders. Later that night, as he lay in bed with Olivia, she whispered, "I'm ready, Adam. I want to be with you." Adam smiled and held her close. Olivia had accepted him, completely and unconditionally. A month later, the day of the trial finally arrived. The judge was different this time, still an old man with a stern demeanor, but not the same one who had heard Adam's earlier case. Things proceeded as Adam had expected. Both Johnson and Carla took the stand, testifying that they were having a routine business meeting at the house. Carla claimed she had gone to freshen up in her private bathroom, while Johnson insisted he was just sitting on the bed, reading a magazine, when Adam burst in and started shooting. Adam's defense team countered, pointing out that it was 2 a.m., in the bedroom of Adam's own home. The prosecution had diagrams and explanations, but Adam's lawyer argued that Johnson could easily have been an intruder, or worse, a rapist. Adam had every right to defend himself. Then came Carla's second round of testimony, where she adamantly denied ever having an affair with Johnson. But that was when the photos surfaced, explicit pictures of her and Johnson, taken after they'd both been discharged from the hospital. The photos left no room for doubt about the nature of their relationship. Carla faltered on the stand, her confident facade cracking under pressure. The photos had been dug up by a top-notch private detective agency hired by Adam's new legal team. The prosecution tried to object, citing the explicit nature of the images, but it was too late. Everyone in the courtroom had already seen them. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Matt Johnson's wife, who had been sitting silently, suddenly stood up and screamed, "You son of a b****************************************************** before storming out of the courtroom, leaving Johnson slumped in his chair, looking utterly defeated. Rachel Martin remained composed, her expression cool and controlled. The judge overruled the prosecution's objections, allowing the photos to be admitted into evidence. It was clear now, Carla had been lying the entire time. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, Adam's testimony. Adam took the stand and faced the jury, his heart pounding in his chest. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. Matt Johnson was sitting on my bed. In my bedroom. I knew him well, he was the face of the bank we worked with when we bought the house. And there he was, sitting on my bed, flipping through my magazine. He had his pants on, but I knew they wouldn't be staying on for long. My wife and I had argued about the security system. She claimed it was to keep us safe from robbers, but I knew better. She wanted to give her boyfriend time to escape. When I saw him there, I wasn't just mad, I was enraged. Logic went out the window. All I could feel was anger. She was in the shower, cleaning herself up. I knew she wasn't doing it for me, she was getting ready for him. Then Johnson stood up and came at me. I had a gun, and I had to defend myself. I shot him once, but he kept coming, so I shot him again. That's when he went down. My wife came out of the shower, staring at me in horror. I knew right then she wasn't with me anymore, she had lied, cheated, and tried to twist everything to make it seem like it was my fault. I was so angry, I shot her. I didn't kill her, but looking back, I know I should have. After what I saw, I just wanted to make sure she would never hurt me again. I'm not sorry. She lied, she betrayed me, and even after I caught her, she tried to make me think it was all just a misunderstanding. If I had to do it over, I would have killed them both. A low murmur spread through the jury box, with some jurors shifting uncomfortably, shocked by Adam's brutal honesty. As he returned to his seat, Rachel gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. For the first time in months, Adam felt a sense of relief. He had told the truth, and whatever happened next, he was ready to face it. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. When they returned, the judge read the verdict aloud. The charge of assault against Matt Johnson is justified. Adam Miller acted in self-defense. The charge of attempted murder of Carla Miller is also justified. Adam Miller's actions were the result of discovering his wife's infidelity and the emotional outburst that followed. Adam Miller is found not guilty on both counts. Adam let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He glanced over at Rachel, who smiled warmly at him. "You're free," she whispered. Adam walked out of the courtroom, the heavy burden of his past slowly lifting from his shoulders. He couldn't wait to get back to Wyoming and start a fresh chapter with Olivia. This time, he vowed, he wouldn't let anyone deceive him again.